Welcome everybody to the Tasmanian Timber webinar on Tasmanian Oak colours, grades and finishes. Michael Lee is going to lead the webinar today, supported by Professor Greg Nolan, to share their many years of insights on Tasmanian Oak for the built environment. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Mick.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, very happy to have Greg on board today, and he will run through a whole heap of the architectural aspects of Tas Oak in the built environment, especially in the interior builds. So, Claire, if we can start the slideshow, that'd be great. Okay, we're going to talk briefly about the Tas Timber Promotion Board, our sustainability and certification, Tas Oak and its properties, grades, fire certificates, only because we've had a lot of queries about the fire certificates, people still having trouble finding Tas Oak, and we'll explain that. Then on to Greg's colours, surfaces and finishes. Okay, the promotion board, as you know, if you've been on these webinars before, it's been in situ since 1970. It's part of the Tasmanian industry. It is a legislated part of the Forestry Act. So without further ado, it's funded by levies imposed to all of the Crown Soil Old people, and it's a showcase for companies and everything marketing. A question we have all the time on the Tas STT estate is sustainability. And again, Tasmania has over 800,000 hectares of sustainable production forest, which we only use 1% of. It's a long-term, quite solid plan. It's listed on the STT website as well as ours. And if you want to look at the full story, it's on Buy Local, Tasmanian Timber on our website. All of the forests have internationally recognised forestry chain of custody certification, which we'll talk about further. Again, questions I've had on PEFC. It's the program for the endorsement of forest certification. It's the world's largest. It's larger than FSC or any of the other certification bodies. PEFC is a non-profit, non-government, very independent. PEFC works throughout the entire forestry supply chain and promotes good practice in the forest to ensure the forest-based products are produced with respect for the highest ecological, social and ethical standards with rigorous checks and balances. The whole of the Tasmanian industry that are under the PEFC are under a group umbrella, so everyone is incumbent to everyone else. So it's a full statewide certification scheme. Chain of custody, AS4707. Look, it tracks everything from the forest base through to an end product. If you walk into one of the major retail stores and they're showing a chain of custody for PEFC, have a look at it, and you could then, if you wanted to, chase this back to a forestry coupe. So everything is tracked from coupe basis all the way through to again maintain, sustainable management, ethical, modern slavery, everything that comes under the PEFC umbrella. It's peace of mind for consumers. Chain of custody ensures the end product consumers are purchasing has come from a sustainably managed forest. Now that goes to a piece of timber from McKay's, Britain's, Neville Smith's, any of these people. You can get their PEFC certification and it will come on their plastics. Hydro wood are the same. It goes through and has an identification number, which you can then go and track back through the Tasmanian PEFC scheme. Okay, I just went through them very quickly. We've talked about them on previous webinars, but I just wanted to reinforce. So what we're talking today is Tas Oak. Tas Oak is a preferred hardwood species for various applications, and as you can see, it's walls, ceilings, floors, veneers, and Greg will talk a lot more about that and its availability, especially in the veneer products, which are now coming to their real fore in the market. We also do CLT and GLT out of it, so cross-laminated and glue-laminated products, stair tread stringers. Several of the Tasmanian companies are very much into that market, as are some of the mainland is using Tas Oak. Tas Oak is very light in colour. It's one of the lightest eucalypts still available on the market. And also, if we want to put into that, we've got Tasmanian shining gum, which is one of the purest white eucalypts on the market. And I'm sure Greg will talk a bit more about that later in the presentation as well. If you jump on the website, everything you need to know about Tas Oak is on there. We've got a full rundown on properties, fire, a whole heap of other issues there. So if we have a look on that, then we go to something that's been causing a little bit of confusion in the marketplace for specification, is the difference between the Australian standard grades and the Tas grades as profit in the prime and classic. The one thing, and as I've said here, one aspect that is never compromised is the fit for service provision in accordance with the Australian standard. And the Australian standard is 2796 Part 2. And everything in the prime and classic meets all the full performance criteria in the Australian standard. It's just a different way of giving levels of feature in the timber. Grade is an accepted description of timber that can be supplied for a project. A grade is means to group like timber characteristics, allow customers to specify a product and allow customers to specify a design trend. A grade does not define product quality or influence fit for purpose. Now that's got to be very clear. We're talking about characteristics in timber and your level of characteristics and the look that you're after, not the fact that it's dried properly, machined properly, sourced ethically. All of those are implicit in all of the grades. Right, the Tasmanian grades, and I think this is fairly important. Tasmania a decade ago decided to stretch and change the grading rules and into two major areas, so prime and classic. Prime, this grade has been designed for the buyer who requires a warmth of timber with a more consistent palette, a more traditional standard select palette with I won't say minimal effect, but a much less feature than the classic grade. Colour and grain structure are always implicit in this. Classic provides a buyer with a constantly higher level of feature in terms of natural characteristics. It's a more contemporary, and we're seeing this especially in floorings and overlays, that people are really looking for what was described to me yesterday as a real timber feel. The person wanted to see gum, they wanted to see knots, they wanted to see it, but they also wanted to be assured that it had the inherent performance characteristics that were desirable in a floor, which they were. And under this prime and classic grade, this is all taken care of. And I'm not sure, Claire, but I think they're up on the website. If not, they're very close to being. They are up. Yep, lovely. Thank you. Prime flooring. Now, this is proof in the pudding. If you look at the whole interior of this build is prime. So you've got prime wall panelling, which is a veneer wall panelling. You've got prime lining on the roof and flooring. In the secondary picture, again, you can see the colour variegation with a little bit of gum and a few other features, but not the high classic variegation that you will see in the next photo. Yeah, classic flooring. This is a Hobart City Hall, which was flooded, and McKay's did a beautiful job of resupplying a very like-for-like floor from the old photos, and this is classic flooring with very high feature, as you can see. Still a beautiful finish, very fit for purpose, fitting commercial in every other aspect. Comparison between the two is the quality of the product will not change. Areas still covered under the Tasmanian standard for aesthetics will still meet the criteria for performance. and the only difference with the amount of feature present. And all of his suppliers can give you samples and show you, and we know that the Tas Timber website has a plethora of case studies on there showing these materials. So jump online and have a look for the inspiration. Out of specification material, which will still be removed, are things like Yellowstone and that, which do not cover off any of the criteria. Beautiful shot of the River's Edge veneer, which I'm sure Greg will talk about that and other like products fairly shortly. Fit for purpose, again, this relates to moisture content, machining tolerances, general form of material, bow, twist and spring, consistency. But this doesn't mean even in colour. Even if you buy a prime or a select grade board, it'll have a variegation of colour out of Tas Oak, less in the new plantation materials available. And again, I know I'll throw to Greg on that as he's had great experience in this shining gum going forward. Okay, performance requirements. Well, I've said that they're all there. It's suitable resistance to service conditions, hardness, toughness, durability. This is something you need to make a decision on, but it's all listed in the technical properties of Tas Oak on a website. Visual consistency in the finished surface from the primary viewing position. This is fairly critical. So if you look at a floor in one direction, it's going to possibly look different than it does in the other direction, especially in the way of parquetries and other things. So the primary viewing position is where you need to actually lay the floor and actually get your visualization from. It doesn't necessarily mean colour or feature consistency in each individual board or sheet. And consistency relates to the combination of colour consistency, grain feature, surface uniformity in sheets or finished elements. All Tasmanian timbers from all of the contributors to the Tas Timber marketing campaign and on the Tas Timber website are audited. They're audited quarterly, and they're audited in a very public manner that says that if there's any failures, that it's reported back to the board so everyone actually understands. I'm pleased to say that the only thing that I've had this year in the way of auditing has been a couple of issues with PEFC numbers, not with quality of timber. So it's very, very well sought after. The mills are very compliant to it, but we do take timber at random on the day of audit. So we always audit upwards of 200 boards per set size. Okay, so any questions, put them up on the message thing and Claire will shoot them through to us. Grade summaries, all grade summary information is under review and will be available on the website shortly, but I think it's already up there, including select, standard and high feature grades listed in 2796 Part 2, as well as the current available prime and classic grade summaries. Just be aware that some products are sold, especially flooring and that, are predominantly in the prime and classic grades, where other materials are available in all of the grades. Okay, other technical details on the website, I'm not going to list them out, but all the other things that you need to see. The key one that comes out of that is density. Availability is quite readily available. Here, Victoria, New South Wales, up the eastern seaboard, everywhere, Tas Oak is very available in all sizes, all dimensions, boards and veneers. I'd just like to drop onto the next slide on fire. Okay, this is a thing that's causing a deal of confusion as people use things like ChatGPT and that to look through the fire certificates. Tas Oak properties are listed in their available fire certificates under their individual botanical names. So Eucalyptus delicatensis, Eucalyptus obliqua, and Eucalyptus regnans. So if you're looking for a fire certificate, you'll find them there. The main species at this time of presentation, and it's reported around the 80% of the mills that I've talked to is Eucalyptus obliqua. So have a look at that. There is very little difference in the fire, but there are in some of the other properties. Certificates also list many of the minor species, with the exception of obviously yew and pine, where we're only talking about a handful of very rare logs. King Billy pine is exactly the same. That's not listed, but celery top, radiata, or anything else, sassafras, blackwood, myrtle, wattle, anything else is listed on those fire certificates and on the TAS website in individual species information. This is the fire certificate. The fire certificate's handled by FWPA Australia and upgraded at regular intervals. So please jump on and have a look. It lists all the species that have been tested, and you do have to actually, when you're looking at the minor species, go to the second part of the certificate where they're listed in their botanical names. Right, I'd like to hand over to my old boss, actually, Professor Greg Nolan from Seesaw and the University of Tasmania. I worked with Greg for a decade and a half, and yeah, look, no one knows more about this area than Greg, so I'll hand over to him now. Any questions, please pop them up, and we'll endeavour to answer.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Michael, and thank you, Claire, for organising these events. Okay, so Claire and Mick asked me to speak about colour in Tasmanian materials and also in finishes. So they're two quite distinct areas, and I've talked. When I'm looking at colour, we're really looking at colour and the surface, the way the material is perceived from the viewer, in the design. Now, there's a core thing we need to remember with every time we're dealing with wood, is that it is a natural material. It comes from an organic source, which means it is naturally genetically variable. So it's not like glass and aluminium and steel, where you have a large scale plant producing stuff that's exactly the same all the time. The timber is intrinsically different. Technically, every piece is unique compared to every other piece. And then it's important that we grade things because of that. And the grading rules that Mike mentioned earlier are the means by which we group together various characteristics, and that you as a designer can then specify the material. And of course, with this is that there is an Australian standard, AS 2796, but 2796 allows you as a designer to negotiate or arrange a grade or some variation of the grade and the visual characteristics with industry. And in part, industry can then define also a grade that it wants to put into the marketplace. And that's what prime and classic are. So if we're looking at Tas Oak and we're looking at colour and surface, we know that Tas Oak is a natural material like all timber. Can we go back one, Claire? Sorry, okay, so, and it ranges in colour from straw, from a pale straw through to a light chocolate brown, but it's mostly mid-light brown boards, or mid-light brown. And you then have a range of natural characteristics that are in the timber that come from the life of the tree. And that's an important characteristic, is that the board comes from a living organism, and you're taking those features that occur to the tree, take the events that occur in the tree, and then have some visual component in the wood. Now, when you're designing, you're then designing for pieces at a particular scale. So the photograph we've got at the moment is a sideboard or a piece of furniture. And in this, the designer can specify or select a dark coloured board with lots of variegation to go as the top board of the faces of the drawers, and then go to lighter colours below. And it's a composition. the designer is then exploiting the range of material that's available from their supplier or in their workshop. So Claire, yep. Now, as designers, there's a whole range of things that we can influence. We can influence the selection of the products, we can influence the treatment we're going to put on the product, and we can also then influence the color of the material. And we can do that by selection of the material, or we can add colors. Now, when we're talking about product, there's a number of major products that we're going to use regularly. The first is a veneer, and many of the projects I'm going to show you will have veneers involved. And the veneers are made, and when a veneer is made, generally the veneer is sliced off a flitch, a piece of timber, and the veneers are kept usually in the sequence that they come off the blade, which gives you then a range of options for how you lay them up, how the producer can lay them to create patterns because of the grain that's in the material. We'll see an example of that as we move through the presentation. So veneer is one of our tools. It's a major product. The next is we've got a board. Now, a board can be, as you might imagine, a dressed all-round rectangular piece with a smooth surface. But it doesn't need to be. You can profile a board. There's many profiles that are available from many suppliers, and you can exploit that range of profiles. Similarly, is that you don't need to plane the material. You can leave parts of the material rough, and that is a similar treatment to the surface that you can then exploit. You can then take boards and you can glue them together, and you can glue them together in what is a bench top, or into a stair tread, or a stair stringer, or into a glue laminated element. Now, if you're doing glue laminated elements, then you're using potentially different grades of material than you will if you're doing a bench top. You might select your bench top for a nice prime prime surface, but you might put a lot of other material then up in your glue lam. And we can look at that in a couple of projects too. We can also look at colouring. Now, many of the photographs I've got today, and I'm going to speak mainly to photographs, have come from University of Tasmania projects. They're UTAS photographs. So I've been able to access them that way. And most of the projects are from Wardle. They're Wardle design buildings that have all been built within the last 3 to 4 years. So I'm not, and then I've taken those as examples of current practice, and we're going to explore some of those things. I've added a couple of extras in, but if you're wondering where the projects are, then they're either at Burnie, they're either at Inveresk, or they're in Hobart. Claire? Okay, so one of the major tools that UTAS wanted, or one of the major characteristics that UTAS wanted, is they wanted comfortable, naturalistic buildings, and they also wanted buildings that had as low a greenhouse gas emission budget as possible. So their requirement for the architects was that the buildings that were being designed had to have calculated greenhouse gas emissions well below, and there was a percentage set, well below the standard emissions for a building of this type. Now, the way in which the architects and the engineers and sustainability consultants could achieve this was by replacing high energy materials or high emission materials with wood. Now, the wood basically has two types of offset. One is that there's atmospheric carbon stored in the wood, and that's a known amount. And also is that the timber itself is relatively low carbon emission in manufacture. So you're actually saving things in two ways. And if we wanted to do the numbers, you could show that the amount that you the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that you avoid is avoided most because you're not using something else. It's not that you're saving the carbon in the timber. So if we look at the photograph we've got here, we've got a public space in one of the Hobart buildings where we've got a large wall at the back that is veneered. So it's veneered board. It's got a substrate on it. Sorry, the veneer is on a substrate. That substrate's probably plywood. And you can see the veneer isn't smooth. Sorry, it isn't visually smooth. It's not all the same color. There is a range of variability, and there's a randomness in the veneer, and that's quite deliberate. So the veneer was specified so that it was random veneer laid up and then put into the walls within certain color limits. This photograph is at the River's Edge building in Launceston, and I wanted to illustrate what you can do with different veneers in this picture. So we've actually got Tas Oak and a range of different applications here. The column there on the left is Tas Oak glulam. The seats are made from solids laminated together. We've got in the top right-hand side of the photograph, you've got a series of random veneer, which then you can see different colors in the veneer. In the face of the screen, that's the roller screen there that's behind the young woman, is that you can see you've got a consistent pattern in the veneers. They're very, very pale, and then there's a series of natural feature marks about the level of her shoulder. This illustrates what you can do because of the way you produce veneer, because you slice the flitch, and each of the veneers are stored as they come off the flitch. If you then lay those veneers together, you'll get repetitive patterns. If you lay them one after the other, you get one sort of pattern, and if you reverse them, or what's called book match the veneers, you get another pattern. Now that can be quite specific, but you as designers can work through and select pieces to satisfy these particular visual take up these visual opportunities. Now you might think, well, that's fine for a small place or a single designer piece, but these are very large buildings, and the design team here went out of their way basically to try and make the best use of the opportunities that were presented by the producers and demonstrating them in the buildings. And this gives you an example of the extent of that. Now, this is the same building. This is the River's Edge building. Michael showed an image of it earlier. This is a close-up of the patterned shapes that are up in the skylight, which are really just baffles. If we want to look at them from an architectural point of view, they're there to break down the light that's coming through the skylights and scatter it down into the atrium space. All of those shapes are made with bent steel edges and LVL frames. So we worked with the builders to make sure that as little steel was used in these as possible. And then you've got the veneered board, which is then fixed to that as LVL frames, and that gives you these delightful pieces. And if you've been in those buildings, and if you're in Launceston at all, by all means, walk into these buildings because they're public buildings. It's a university, so they're public buildings. You can walk in during normal office hours and have a look at exactly the level of detailing that you can see. This is straight Tas Oak that's been veneer board by a major local producer and applied after some very deliberate design. Claire? One other thing then is that in many of the buildings, there was a need to ensure that there was acoustic, the timber formed part of an acoustic surfaces, were able to moderate the sound inside the building. And so much of the veneer and the plain surfaces was punctured. And that gave you then an acoustic surface. There's an acoustic mat in behind the veneered board, and that's then part of the overall design of the building. But it also then gives you a lot of really lovely detail and scale. Some of the other photographs we've seen also had the punctured surfaces. But when you get to this level where you've got a student sitting on a timber bench, timber edging, and you've got the punctured surfaces, you then get a very, very nice piece of localized design that is very attractive for the user. I think this change of scale is something that as designers we need to consider. As we get closer, or as the user can get closer to the object, we want to make sure that those surfaces then are particularly attractive and comfortable for the person to touch and be near. So this is the foyer of the forestry building in Hobart. It's called the forestry building. It used to be STT, the Sustainable Timber Tasmania building. The university then has converted it into a campus building. This is a working area in the building, and you can see that there's a range of different timber applications that have been used through. We've got Tas Oak solids in all the benches. We've got a Tas Oak floor. We've got veneered board as walls, and then we have lots of trim, which has gone round and shaped and profiled in things like handrails and surfaces, etc. Now, in this particular area is that the designers wanted to engender calm and have working spaces which were reasonably quiet but comfortable at the same time. And so the color palette they've chosen out of the material reinforces that. The surfaces being smooth provide then this comfortable surface both on the floors, the bench tops, and the walls. You can though then use the material to create interest. So this is part of the project, part of another, again, a Wardle building. Again, it's one of the UTAS buildings, and this is at the Burnie campus. And you can see that profiled materials have been used to create interest. So the timber's been profiled to generate shadows. The profiles vary as they go around the shape of that inner shed pavilion you want to in the center there of the photograph, and that creates a whole range of visual interest, which is quite different then to this relatively smooth shape of the glulam beams there that are on the left hand side, or the ceiling. Now there's a number of producers in Tassie who are very, very good at making profiles. That have quite extensive ranges of profiles that then allow you to make surfaces which are particularly interesting. Now, that surface could, having been to that project, I know that those surfaces aren't stained, but those surfaces could be stained with a colour to darken it up or to lighten it, depending upon the intent of the design. You can then get you can use a whole range of tools to then get visual variety depending upon the scale of your project and your viewpoints, the way in which people can look at them from around the building. Again, this is a Wardle building. This is the shed, I think it's called, at Inveresk. And we're looking down from one of the upper stories at the floor and at some work modules. or some seating modules that are inside this larger space. Now you can see the floor. The floor is all smooth surfaced, but you can see the color variation that you would normally get out of Tas Oak. And here the color variation is enjoyed. You've got pale boards, you've got darker boards, darker chocolate boards, and you've got then the range of mid browns that form up the rest of the material. You've also then on the roofs, you've got a range of boards that may be recycled or where the finish is not the same as the boards, as the floorboards, and where they're spaced. So you're creating a series of patterning in those roof spaces that then allow you to have a better view from above rather than something that's more consistent and less interesting. This is something that also you'll see if you go into any of these projects, which is the use of boards which are not smooth. This is a floorboard. This is flooring, and this is in the library building at Inveresk. And you'll see that the surface of the material has bandsaw marks on it. Now, knowing the producer, those bandsaw marks are probably original. So the producer has taken the board, they've left the surface of the board as produced in the mill, but they've profiled the remainder. So they've profiled a tongue on one side, a groove on the other, and they've thickened, they've profiled the back of the board so that it can be glued down to the floor. And you can see then that that means all the boards are consistent thickness because you've planed one side. You've got a tongue and groove so that they'll fit together normally. And then you've provided this roughened surface, which gives you a whole lot of visual interest. And this is used quite extensively throughout the floors of the building. This also then means it's okay, these are public buildings. The Tas Oak is used very regularly throughout all of the study areas as the flooring material. So that suggests that, and I think use will show that the material is quite robust enough to sustain use in these areas. Someone asks, are there issues with coating this type of uneven surface? And generally there's not. Many of the coatings now are put on with quite thick-haired rollers, and they will go through this surface without too much problem. Claire, if we can go to the next one, is that if we reflect back on what we saw with the previous floor, while I believe the surface was as milled, those surfaces were still cleaned up. In other words, they would have been washed. There would have been potentially given a light sand to give you an attractive appearance surface. This is a slightly different use. This is in a tourist installation, apartments. And here the Tas Oak's been used as a lining board. Again, it would have been tongue and grooved on the edges. But the boards are then used exactly as they've come off the rack, because you can see those regular spacing marks up the wall, and in the business we call those sticker marks. That's where the drying sticks have been put in between the timber to assist it drying and keeping it flat. So they're all still visible, where in the previous slide they were not. So here, these boards have basically just been processed, and then they've been put on the wall, and then they would have been coated. So we can deal with different types of coatings in a minute. So can we just go back on again, Claire? Sorry. Okay, so we can deal with different coatings, and of course, when we speak about coatings, as we will in a second, the coating that goes on the floor has obviously got to do quite a different job than the coating that's on the wall. And here, on this surface, there's a range of opportunities we've got for coating, which are probably slightly more than what we can put on the floor, because the floor's got a lot of issues. Someone's asked, can these be coloured? I can say yes, we'll deal with colour in a second. So, Claire? There's ways then of modifying the visual appearance of the material, and they're probably quite legion. I'm not going to mention too many of them. There are ways that are deployed where material can be heat treated, it can be charred. We'll see some charred material in a minute. It can be stained. The surfaces can be roughened. The roughness you see in the previous two slides were basically just production marks, but it's also possible then to roughen them in other ways to give you a visual appearance. The one I want to speak about mainly today is about staining. So staining allows you as a designer then to modify the material and provide specific color combinations. Tas oak lends itself to staining for a whole range of reasons. One is that the grain is quite regular. It absorbs a stain quite well, but the grain pattern of the material will still come through, given that the stain is not too intensive. Now you can apply a stain directly then to the timber surface, the timber or the veneer surface, or you can complete an object like a joinery cupboard or a table, and then you can apply the stain in the finish, and then that finish then coats the wood and gives you a colour. There's a whole variety of stains that are available, and they generally come from finishes manufacturers. So we've got a quote there from a senior designer at Spacecraft Joinery, where they say, "We use Tasmanian oak constantly. It's reliable, it's workable, it takes stains beautifully, and the grain is always good, gorgeous. We even did an emerald green wash on a project recently, and it still lets the grain shine through." So it gives you an indication of the way in which materials will take a stain. There used to be, and I suspect there will come back into style, traditions of liming material to whiten it up, and other colours can be used in the same way. Claire? So this is a manufactured product. If we look at the flooring there, that is made by a Tasmanian manufacturer, and the material is stained before it goes into the marketplace. So the grain of the material is Tas oak, the boards are Tas oak, but it has that stain applied over the top in the factory, and these can be then purchased. As designers, you can select staining as a design choice and decide then how you want those stains applied. Okay, I mentioned earlier on charring, and I've put this one in because Claire gave me all the access to all these gorgeous photographs, and I was thinking, God, which one can I include? This little pavilion here in its black is Tas oak, but the surface has been charred to increase its durability. So that's one of the main reasons you use it, and that's one of the main reasons charring is used internationally, because many of the species, say in Japan and Europe, are very low durability, and the charring then drives out of certain chemicals out of the surface of the wood, which then makes them less appetizing for bugs. So they last longer. It also gives you these beautiful black colors that you can then run into your design. So this is a charred surface. There are producers who can manufacture a charred board for you to give you this sort of appearance. It's a way of modifying the surface of the material. And I think as designers, the material provides us a range of natural characteristics and we can use those, but then there is also ways in certain areas we can modify those surfaces to give us particular appearance options. I'm conscious of time and I want to get into finishes. So finishes, now this is a little technically, a bit technically quite more complex area. So finishes are coatings that we apply to a timber surface. And generally when we're looking at finishes, there's a couple of performance requirements that we want. First of all, we want to protect the surface from wear, moisture, and various contaminants, dirt, mud, the whole range of things. We want to enhance the timber's appearance so that we want to be able to bring the grain out. And we want to then also support ongoing maintenance. Now, probably the hardest area or the thing that best illustrates this is the basketball floor or a basketball floor like this. So obviously that floor is going to take a lot of wear. So we want a surface that will help the timber resist the wear of all those shoes going on it. We want to be able to wash it. We want to be able to keep dirt out. And so the surface we pick for this, or the finish we pick for this, is something we would need to be that's quite rugged. It will enhance the appearance, but we also, when we consider that basketball floors are community facilities and they may be in operation for 70, 80 years, we want to consider how we can maintain these things going forward. Okay. So if we're looking at a project such as, again, this is one of the UTAS buildings, the Wardle designs, where we've got this large structural elements above and we've got walking areas below, we can see that there's a range of different applications in there that will have a range of different demands. There's three main types of finish. Now, I'm not talking about brands here. I'm just talking about if we want to group things chemically, there's ways in which we can group them. And the first group is mixes of oils and waxes. So they can be natural oils and natural waxes, which are then mixed together. We can then take those oils and waxes and we can include a resin, and that will be a mix that can then be marketed. And then there are things like polyurethanes and varnishes that have very similar characteristics. And each of these three will have different performance and a different visual outcome. Now, I've put a table together because it's just easier to explain these sorts of things. If we look at performance requirements across the top, we've got hardness, we've got resistance to wear, which is generally directly related to hardness. We've got penetration of the wood, because finishes generally come with two types. They'll be an absorbing type, which molds to the surface of the wood, or they'll form a film across the top of the wood, which means they don't soak in. And that's important when we look at things like maintenance. So also is that these things will have an impact on air quality, particularly when they're first installed, as a slow burn when they're in use, but particularly if we're going to try and replace or recoat things. And then you've got ease of maintenance. So if I look through these, when we look at oils and waxes are not very hard. They don't have high wear resistance. You're not going to use them on a basketball floor. You might use them in a home. They penetrate into the wood. They don't off-gas, which is important. I mean, the things that they do come out are actually natural oils and natural wax scents, and they're reasonably easy to maintain. Now, because you've got penetration with both oil and waxes and resin oil waxes and resin mixes is that you can touch up an area of a flooring or wall or table or whatever that's coated with an oil and wax and resin combination, because it does penetrate into the surface. So when you put a new coating on, the visual appearance doesn't change. So you do get the penetration, which is good. You get slightly more impact on air quality with resins. They've got a stronger smell. There are a range of producers at the moment who are specializing in making completely natural oil resin mixes that have a very good operational life in venues like homes. And there's ones that add a resin then to provide greater resistance. So a good oil wax resin mix might be something you use on a floor. Polyurethanes and similar coatings are hard. They've got good wear resistance. They form a film on the surface of the wood, so they don't penetrate. They can be quite smelly. The old spirit-based ones were particularly smelly. The water-based ones are not are much less lower impact. So you can recoat in an operational building with a water-based one. The thing with maintenance, though, is that if the polyurethane goes through, like you don't keep up recoating it, and you go through the surface, you've actually got to resand the whole floor, because you'll end up with a patch. And if you try and put a new bit of coating over the top, that patch is always going to be obvious. So there's lots of ease of maintenance with polyurethanes and coatings. But you've then got to be conscious of maintenance. As soon as any area starts to look like it's getting a bit thin, you need to recoat the things. And that will depend on the traffic that you're expecting in a project. So if you're doing tabletops or benches, then using an oil wax resin is actually much more desirable than using a poly, because a poly can come away. You can wear through a bit where you're using the bedboards all the time. The oil wax resin mixes you can finish off and recoat and freshen it right up. Okay, so there's a couple of I think we're getting close to time, so I'm just going to open it up for a few questions from anybody. I've got one here about heat treatment and the difference between heat treatment and charring. Okay, there is a difference. So charring generally affects the surface. So I've seen one or two charring lines, and effectively you're putting the timber through a big toaster that's got naked flame, and it's charring the surface. The back of the board isn't necessarily affected. If you're heat treating, you're putting the whole packs of timber into a kiln, and you're heating it right up, and you're getting it to a temperature where you're getting a color variation throughout the whole board. So it sends it into a darker brown or a more consistent brown. So the two things are different. The impact on durability is still relatively unknown. We know that it improves the durability, but we don't know how much, because the tests for determining how much take about 40 years, and we haven't had the stuff for 40 years to put it in the tests, if that makes sense. Claire, have we got any more questions? We've got a question here about the coatings that might have been used in the UTAS buildings. I suspect that the floor coatings have been polyurethanes, but I don't know what they've been used for, what other coatings have been used. There may be the oil resin mixes used on some of the working surfaces where they know people are going to be be using things on a fairly irregular basis. But with a university building where you've got lots of people coming in, there is an expected level of wear you're going to get. So regular maintenance is probably something they've taken into account.
If anyone else has questions, please pop them up into the chat.
Yep, or alternatively, Claire, give us a call on the Expert Timber Helpline, and if we can't answer it, we can surely get Greg to give you an opinion on it, that's for sure, and give us some answers.
And so the Expert Timber Helpline, the number is on the homepage of the Tasmanian Timber website, the 1300 number. Mick answers that Expert Helpline. So he's the person that you will get if you call, and then he can direct you. If he doesn't have the answer, he'll certainly be able to direct you to the right person who does. So if you're trying to specify timber, if you're trying to find a supplier, if you're looking for volumes of availability of a particular veneer sheet or style, or Mick can direct you.
Claire, if there's not any other questions, there's just one thing I'd like to wrap up with. Mick mentioned earlier the introduction of shining gum into the marketplace. So shining gum is a plantation hardwood. There's a lot of material that's been grown as sawlog. So you end up with timber that's very, very clean material. It's very pale in colour. So it leads a whole range of opportunities in both veneering for very pale surfaces, or something that you then want to put a different colour into. So that is available. I didn't cover it because there was a range of things to cover. I think there's another important thing that I'd just like to add about the differentiations between prime, classic, and the acceptance and the use of natural feature, is that because wood's a natural material, we're always going to get material that has feature in it that represents the life of the tree. From a sustainability point of view, we want to be making sure that all of the recovery we can get out of the tree is used, and it's used in a structure, and it's used with both quality and with awareness. So that means is that if we've got a certain range of featured material which is coming out of the sawmills, we as designers should be trying to find ways in which we can use that material and use it in our best endeavours, because otherwise it's a resource and we're not using it properly. So I think it's an important consideration as designers that we understand the variability and the ranges of materials that are available, and be trying to get them into projects where people can understand that if we're using low carbon and natural materials, then this is one of the aspects of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Greg.
Pleasure.
I've been involved in a lot of webinars and I learnt a lot. Mick, did you have anything you wanted to add before we close?
No, only to thank Greg for his input on this, because his expertise is invaluable. Again, the 1300 line, give us a call if you want any questions answered. And if the things that Greg's talked about today, well, we can direct you to that too. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.